All right. Well, good morning. We will go ahead and get started, or afternoon, I guess, depending on where you are joining us from. Thank you so much for joining us for Global Advising Week and the Region 4 event today. So we're very excited to celebrate Global Advising Week, which is celebrated when articles of incorporation were signed, creating NACADA. So each year we celebrate the amazing work of advisors, tutors, personal tutors, counselors, and coaches who advise students around the world and do tremendous work. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to turn it over to Anna, who is going to tell you all a little bit about Sophia Learning, who is sponsoring all of the Global Advising Week activities. So Anna?
Great. Thanks so much, Kylie. Hi, everyone, and thanks for being here today. I'm Anna Del Rosario. I'm a Partner Success Manager at Sophia. And as a former academic advisor, I'm super excited to join you all for this NACADA event. I just wanted to start by telling you a little bit about who we are at Sophia Learning. We're an online learning platform designed by educators for today's learner. Our catalog includes more than 70 courses that are ACE recommended and designed to transfer for credit. I'm also proud to share that recently we were endorsed by the Higher Learning Commission as a short-term credential provider. As far as our mission, it's simple but important to help learners reach their educational goals and expand their access to economic mobility. What really sets us apart comes down to just a few things. First, our flexibility. Our learner-driven platform allows students to move at their own pace and fit coursework into their own schedules. Second, our affordability. Students can access all Sophia courses for just $99 a month with textbooks and course materials included. And most importantly, we see real impact. So, for example, learners at the University of Maryland Global Campus who successfully completed Sophia courses enrolled into their fourth term at a 37% higher rate than their peers. Overall, Sophia learners have completed more than 1.6 million courses and have earned over 4.8 million transfer credits at receiving institutions. And just one last thing before we move forward, I wanted to say how much at Sophia we truly appreciate the work that you all do every single day to support students and help them achieve their goals. Now I'll pass it over to Rachel, who'll get us started.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. Give me one moment while I pull up my presentation. But if you guys want to take a few seconds and in the chat, just kind of put who you are, where you're from. I see someone's already taken advantage of the networking piece and mentioned LinkedIn. So I would love to hear from you guys in the chat where you are joining us from.
I also failed to mention we are recording this session just for purposes for people to go back to learn a little bit about what is discussed later. The chat will not be recorded.
Thank you so much. I did mention that to Kylie as we were getting ready to set up, because I know that sometimes when we're discussing things about the state of Florida, that can feel a little scary, just because we want to make sure that we're working through that. So, oh my gosh, there's so many people from different places. I'm so excited.
And I want to go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Thomas Beckwith. I am the Region 4 Chair. And I just want to go ahead and thank Rachel in advance for taking the lead to doing this presentation, as well as happy Global Advising Week to everyone.
Thanks, Thomas. I saw you log in. I was going to give you a shout out, so I'm glad you went ahead and did it for me. So thank you so much for your service as our chair. It's definitely been a blessing to have you guys. So awesome. Okay, so many people. I was wondering, one of the things I was wondering as we were getting ready to prepare this session is, since we are talking about Florida, I wasn't sure if we were just going to see Florida friends or if we were going to see people from all over, which I'm really excited to see people from as far as Boston, Massachusetts, and it looks like we got people from Arizona, and Texas, and then a lot of my Florida friends. I saw Deborah Hobson log in. I was like, I met you at Region this year. So nice to meet you or see you again. So many options. So let's go ahead and get started, shall we? So as you can see, based on my presentation, we're going to be talking through our policies and politics in the Florida's higher ed system. So my name is Rachel Mars, and I currently work at the University of West Florida in Pensacola, Florida, which is in the Panhandle. We are not in the long part, the peninsula. Sometimes people make jokes that we're literally lower Alabama. I do not, I'm in Florida, mainly because I came from Alabama. So it's definitely different here working through this. And so, one of the things that I have been also blessed to do, I was elected as the Florida State Liaison for our Region 4, leadership committee. So, I've been thankful to be part of this leadership team. Thomas has done a wonderful job. He's also in Florida, so that's been kind of cool to work with someone else on that. So moving forward, we are going to do a quick, as we've already kind of done our welcome and who you are, where you are. The next point of our discussion is we're going to talk about the various things that Florida academic advisors have to utilize or have to monitor as part of their roles. If you're not from Florida, it's probably going to sound pretty overwhelming, and this is just a very broad focus, just because I want to make sure that we kind of talk through the dynamics and the things that what policies and what politics might be impacting us. And then we will conclude with an open discussion and everything. And then I've also got my contact information at the end of this presentation, including how to find me on LinkedIn. So first off, what we're going to do is we're going to actually do a poll, because what I would love to hear from you is what you've heard. So give me 1 second. I'm going to swap sharing, and I'm going to make our poll everywhere active and present it. So you guys can start utilizing the questions. We'll kind of go through our next question. So the first question is, what have you heard about Florida's higher education system? We got it. Once we hit 30, once we hit 30 surveys completed, we'll go through the questions. But does anybody want to put in the chat what you have heard? Or if you want to come off mute and share with me? Is it making me go through all of the questions? Trying to figure out what's going on, because it's only showing me 3 are completed and then 29 are underway. So we think it must be making me go through all the questions. Thank you, Brady. So, right, too polarizing. We're trying to make the Florida higher education system more like Coastal College. Performance-based funding and curriculum changes, correct? Talk about performance-based funding in a few moments. So in the effort to stay on time, I'm going to move forward, but for those elected officials saying it's too woke, faculty tenure changers, highly politicized, yes, absolutely. So thank you so much for sharing about what state you're from. And then some people mentioned they're skipping that question, totally okay. And then people say no DEI, change the name for all courses, but confuse everyone by essentially having the same requirements. That's a very good point. Absolutely. Our next question was, are you an administrator or an advisor? And so I'm really excited to see a very large representation of advisors here today. I'm sure because you're managing it yourself, it probably feels very relevant. So thank you. Most of you've heard about Florida. It's horrible, conservative changes, restrictions. I live here. The state government has made changes to universities. It's encroaching on academic freedom. Nothing. Okay. That's okay. Not much. It's okay. All right. And then in a word, describe the education in your state. So in the chat, can anyone tell me what you're surprised about, what you've heard about, or what you're seeing in this word cloud as it changes? Loving the exactly. Convoluted, yes. Controlling, exhausting. I bet those are people in Florida. So there's a lot of different ways that we can describe this. I see a lot of heavy words in this conversation. It makes it hard to want to do the job that we've been tasked with doing sometimes. And how do you feel about your state's higher education system? I love it. It makes our jobs enjoyable. No comment. It is what it is. Those are all really good. That's, it is what it is what I expect it to be the most popular response. So it's interesting. No comment was close second. I was going to be very excited and ask what state you work in if the first one was your answer. So I'm going to exit full screen and you guys can continue to take the survey if you want. But basically, that's kind of where we're at when it comes to in Florida. One of the things that there's a lot of different ways that you can describe the state of Florida's education system. One of the ways that we often see is students, they will even feel the same way that we're feeling sometimes as advisors. And so one of the ways that we're going to talk to today is like, how do we work, in a system that is controlling, frustrating, unrelated, all those words, and how do we not lose hope because education at its core is about finding the next step. How do we encourage our students while staying encouraged ourselves, those type of things. And this is an open discussion. So this is a discussion. So it's not meant for me to be just talking to you in a vacuum. So feel free to put things in the comments as we go along and we can work through those together. So moving forward, our next point of discussion is the free state of Florida. So for those that are not from Florida, you may not be fully aware of all the things that the state of Florida has required or legislated when it comes to education. And I would like to point out that a lot of this legislation is not just regarding higher education, it is also regarding K through 12. And so there is a lot of aspects that we, as an education system in our state, have to manage. And so and when I was doing my research to make sure I had everything correct, that was something that I almost was a little bit surprised about. I shouldn't have been, because I know how thorough and detailed that our Board of Governors and the Florida State Education Board are, but they have a piece of the puzzle, especially when it comes to civic literacy, which we'll mention in a minute, in every aspect of education. And so the post-secondary civic literacy is the one I'm going to focus on for today. Post-secondary civic literacy is essentially the state is wanting our graduates from public colleges and universities to show a knowledge of civic literacy, which includes American
Mr. Morris.
Hi, yes, can I help you?
What state are you from?
I work in Florida.
Wow, I'm on time.
Yes. Awesome. So, do you mind if I continue with my presentation, Mr. Wu?
Presentation, yes.
Okay, thank you. So the knowledge of American democracy, the Constitution, founding documents, and major Supreme Court cases. The way that the state of Florida measures the students' civic literacy proficiency, so to speak, is they have to take not only a course, it's about 4 different approved courses, but there's also a exam they have to complete. And most universities are responsible for providing the access and facilitation of that exam. And a lot of cases, they're not paid for that work. And so it's very interesting how we work on that as a as an institution individually and then as a large scale thing. We also have career readiness, which is another thing that the state of Florida puts within every piece of the education system. In our higher education, there is a module that the students have to complete, at least at our college. And I'd love to know from other universities if this is the same. You could just put it in the chat. But the career readiness training module is focused on basically making sure they know how to find a job, how, where do they see themselves, how do they work with in the work environment that is, abundant in our current American culture. And there's also things about that, like, the resources, like they have to have access to Handshake, which is, if you've worked at a university for any length of time, you've probably heard of Handshake. And then the other piece of the puzzle that before we get to performance-based funding metrics, is general education changes that come down the pipeline. It feels like almost yearly from the Board of Governors. And basically what this means is that they will change because we have a common general education repository for our students that they can accomplish, like their social sciences, general sciences, their humanities and foreign language and all of that. And so there are changes that happen, and it often not only affects our advising teams, not just from a knowledge perspective, but a communication perspective to the students. And then also, even depending on the department that the advisors work with, there may be changes within those different departments, because a course that may have counted for a common prerequisite is no longer part of the core curriculum. So that means that student has to take one more additional course, even though they have to take this common prerequisite. I do see a hand raised. Lynn, feel free.
I just wanted to point out, there's an article today in, I have to figure out which, WINK News. So I'm not sure where that is, but the Florida Department of Education has approved a substitution or an alternate course for AP, where it is, I don't know if you already talked about this because I came in late, but it's free of ideological bias, and it's going to give college credit if they pass a specific exam. I put the link in the chat.
Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. I had not seen that article yet. The most recent change I was aware of was, and it's one that really hits close to home because I work in the College of Health at the University of West Florida, is DEP 2004, which is a 2000 level psychology class that majority of our programs require as part of a common prereq, and then also as part of their major requirements. And that was very hard for our team to hear that, because we've had to adjust that, and we're still working through that, honestly. But yeah, that's a really great piece. And so that's a great example of another piece of legislation, and also how quickly things can change in the state of Florida. And so it's very challenging sometimes to keep up with all of that. And then the last piece of the puzzle, which is probably the largest, to be very frank, is performance-based funding metrics. So a lot of states have these. I don't know a state that does it quite as detailed as maybe Florida does. I do know that there are states surrounding Florida that are getting ready to adapt or basically, they're going to implement them on their, like I saw a friend recently from my time in Alabama when I worked at a university there, and she mentioned that they were getting ready to implement that in the state of Alabama. And so the performance-based funding metrics, there's 10 of them technically, but some of them have subsequent metrics. So like there's 2 per metric. And so for advisors, there are 4 active metrics of these that we are directly related to, and sometimes seems like and feels like fully responsible for managing. They are first-year students, so metric 4, which is first time in college students and their graduation rates. They have 4 years to graduate, and we have to really work with them. Then we have our Pell Grant students, and so Pell Grant students have to essentially graduate within 6 years from the fall that they start. And then the other 2 that we now are that there was just 1 more that we were managing. Now it's 2. They just added this one, is related to transfer students. And so transfer students are in 2 categories. They are in either Florida only transfers. That's the first metric. They have 3 years to graduate. And then, thank you, Brooke. So, and then we have, and then we have another one that they just added, which is basically the secondary AA degree, which, or secondary transfer student, which is basically anybody from anywhere transferring into our college. And as my colleague Brooke Cialino just put in the chat, at UWF alone, we're tracking 15 cohorts of students at a time. And it's a lot. My advisors will tell you that, you know, we're having a lot of interaction and stuff with this, trying to say that. So did I say 3 years to grad for Florida only transfers? Yes, I did. So that was the one that was previous, and then they added the 4-year transfer rate for those that are. And then at the larger university scale, the universities, no, we'll talk about that in a minute, Anne. And so these are guidelines from the state that basically they grade all the institutions in the Florida state system on how well they perform. And there's a whole lot of nuance to that. I'm willing to talk about that offline. I feel like it would just take up a lot of time if we try to do that. And so that's a good question, Lacey. Let's hold on to these are good questions. Let's come back to them at the end, if you don't mind, guys. So all that to say, I want to give you this picture because our slogan, moniker, motto, whatever you want to say, for the state of Florida is Free State of Florida. You take from that what you will. So we'll keep moving forward. So to talk through this, when I was writing this presentation, the thing that kind of came up, and I was actually listening to an article from another podcaster I listened to, and they talked about how policies at the state level often create group projects that universities must individually address. And that is very true in the state of Florida. And this is where those performance-based funding metrics come in, civic literacy. These are state-led policies that the universities may have to address from a group project standpoint. And I'm going to speak from what my university is doing, just because I know that might help others. I also would love to hear from you as we go through the open discussion, like what is your university doing if you're in Florida, or if you're in another state where maybe these aspects are being implemented, how are you working to handle these? Because one of the things I hope that comes out of this presentation today is that you feel a little less alone, but also that, you know, we are all on this group project together of trying to prove our university's worth and mettle. And while at the end of the day, it does feel like sometimes we're being pushed in a direction that we're not always in agreement with, we have to figure out how to work within the systems that we currently are in. So let's move forward. So one of the things that I was thinking about as I was going through and just kind of reflecting on what I wanted this presentation to really work through, is I wanted to remind us that as academic advisors, we are the guiding light to graduation. So the things that we say, the things that we do have an impact, but I also want to remind us that sometimes there are things out of our control, like waves and storms that hit the rocks that we're currently standing on in the work that we're doing. And we just have to kind of flow with it. And we have to remind ourselves that at the end of the day, this job is important, but the student is more important. And so ways that we kind of the challenges that we have to deal with when it comes to these policies and these things, number one is student onboarding. How do we get them to care? How do we get them to want to graduate in a timeline that helps us and them? How do we incentivize that? The other thing is advisor time and process management. So making it, how do we give advisors time back if we're going to keep asking them to do these particular tracking numbers or tracking moments? And how do we do this type of thing? Also, university resources. As I mentioned earlier, with civic literacy, the testing, that is all usually upon the institution where that student is attending, and they are responsible for gathering resources, facilitating testing, or finding other opportunities. Like in the state of Florida, one of the blessings that we have, at least at our university, we've kind of learned recently is that there is some remote options for exams for different challenges and stuff. And like our university has a registration system that students are informed through it, that they have to go through the registration system in order to, learn about, we tell them, but, to actually like indicate, I'm going to do this option. And then that is basically how the university knows that someone is getting ready to do their civic literacy test. And then the other piece of this is change navigation. Just like Lynn shared, there's been another change. And we are literally having to manage all of these gale force winds that are coming at us. And so figuring out how to do that is always how to be stalwart in the light of all of this is really hard. And that's why I have a lighthouse as my background, because I do really believe that academic advisors can sometimes act as the lighthouse and rise above all processes to help the students understand and guide them toward that graduation. So let me take a minute to get some water, and I would love to hear from you either by coming off mute or in the chat. What are waves and storms that maybe I haven't mentioned yet that you think need to be, or even if I have, what's a wave or a storm that you feel like you're going through right now when it comes to your academic advising journey and you're working through these processes? Well, we'll just hold on to the end till the end then. With hurricanes and the chaos, yes, that's a good point. I'm in Florida. I really should have thought about hurricanes. That would have been a better analogy. Absolutely, hurricanes for sure. So, hi, Lynn, go ahead.
We recently have been told that our university-wide requirements have to, what's the word? Have to comply with the law against having divisive content. So things that were not state core or state gen ed, we now, like we have a program called Quest, which is required, 6 credits that are required of all of our students. And those courses now have to comply with that, which they did not before because it was our requirement. Our gen ed, we had an international course requirement that has to comply. And we're trying to figure out if our writing requirement has to comply. But that means courses that students registered for summer and fall are actually losing their ability to count for Quest or international, like right now, literally. And students have already registered, and yeah.
Now you're having to do the dash of finding them something different. Absolutely. One person put in the chat that civic literacy requirement has changed in some fashion every year since it was implemented. That is very, very good point, Margarita. That is something that we definitely, I feel like that is one of to me, the constant in Florida is the change. Like, change is always the game, and adjustments and stuff, and some not always great, some good, depending on what we're doing. Doris said, supporting students who need more support than I've given all that I have. That is such a good point. Absolutely. So I want to encourage you to think about, and this is going to be hard because sometimes these type of situations, changing our thinking is thinking about opportunities. So these pieces of the puzzle that we have to manage, especially in Florida, often give us a lot of challenges. Yes. But there are opportunities. And so one of the things that I've seen just in my work where I am is that cross-training and collaboration have almost increased in a way, just because we're all working towards the same goal at our institution. And so we are not only cross-training with other advising offices, but even and collaborating with also like our career center to encourage those different things. We are also working with we have an academic advocacy and graduation success office, which is kind of that goes in my next point, which necessity is the mother of invention. So we are working through that office has been created. It's going on. I think we're going into its second year, and I think we're about to hit its second year of existence. And so their whole office for academic advocacy and graduation success, their goal is to work with these students as advocates, not academic advisors. And so they work alongside the academic advisors to support the students, also, advocate for the students if there is something that maybe is outside the realm. So for example, a student says, well, the only reason I'm not going to school this summer is because I don't have financial support. And so these are pieces of the puzzle that we have to work together. And that's a really good question, Thomas. Yeah, but does the cross-training dim the light of individuals' boots on the ground? That is a really good question that I honestly don't know the answer to. I think that it depends on who you ask. I definitely think there is a piece to the puzzle where advisors feel almost not belittled, but like they feel like their jobs are not being supported as adequately because there is such this focus on metrics. And that is something that as a supervisor I try to work through while also we have to maintain these goals. And student partnerships, you know, we have to get for I don't know how yet. This is a part that I feel like we're still working on, is how do we get students to understand the necessity for them to graduate on time, especially when their own waves and storms hit them and we have to support them through that. And then Brooke says in the chat that there's inequity between the larger state university systems and smaller regional universities regarding student population and the ability to meet current metric goals. That is correct. It isn't a one size fits all situation. For example, what I just mentioned is that not all students in our college or our university, we have a lot of non-traditional students at our regional university, and so they are not able to attend in a more succinct format than maybe another larger institution is used to. And so there's a lot of those pieces in the puzzle that we have to work through. So I would love to hear from you guys if you could, we can't abolish metrics. That's the thing that we can't do. We can't abolish these things. But if there was a resource that you could say, I'm going to fix it, I'm going to fund this immediately, what would you do? Is there anything that you would ideally love to see happen in order to support these particular challenges that we're facing? Hard to think of whenever we're in the middle of it, right? So let's table that question and we'll come back to it. No, go back. So I do want to share with you practical steps that we have taken, at least at our institution at the University of West Florida, to make sure that we are, at least in our advising capacities, doing our due diligence. And so the practical steps that we've utilized is some of these are university-wide things, they're not just academic advising. So we often have advisor onboarding that includes state policies. We also try to make sure our advisors stay up to date. So we have a university advising council where and then also we have a meeting with the academic advocacy group every other week that essentially makes sure that we're on target. And then, as I mentioned, the state policies as they come across our desks, we try to make sure our teams are updated. We also utilize templates for appointments. We have, at least in my college, we have a e-handbook, and there is some freedom to adjust it. You know, graduate students don't always have they don't have civic literacy needs, thankfully. But we want to make sure that as we are in these appointment templates, we are, making sure that civic literacy is, checked or reviewed. And there's also other pieces of that puzzle that we'll get to in a minute. But the other piece is that the degree programs that these students are in, there is a movement on our campus towards requiring civic literacy and even the career readiness exam to be completed prior to admission. Locally in our own College of Health, we're seeing that with the BSN students. Also, our degree audit system has markers for the civic literacy course and exam, in addition to their other degree requirements. So it's a degree requirement, but it's also there's that civic literacy piece for a state requirement. And then other things that we're seeing are advisors working together with faculty to find solutions for general education course changes. We're seeing this a lot right now just because we're all in the middle of the same scramble to fix challenges that pop up without any notice. And we also have partnerships with our career services and other units, like I mentioned, the academic advocacy group on metrics and career readiness. The career services office, I'm probably messing up their name. I think it's Career Development Center. but they will do a outreach, and they usually update the colleges on where their students are that are getting ready to graduate, or how many students they have that academic year or that academic semester that have not completed it. And so we work together to communicate and make sure things are up to date, and also notifying students. Additionally, thankfully, we have a really awesome registrar office. They work very hard to make sure all of their records and the degree audits are accurate. But there are times whenever we do have students, especially like in programs that are limited access, like are in the DSN, that maybe they come in with a course that hasn't been seen before for civic literacy, or just for whatever reason, all the transfer courses that got processed, they missed it. And so we work with them to get a transfer course review for civic literacy and get an application to it. There is also the appeal process that, there are things that pop up. And as someone mentioned, the civic literacy piece has changed a lot over the years. And so we have to kind of be mindful of that. And they are great at working that with us. So thinking about practical steps, this is kind of where I would love to hear some feedback from you. Is what is your university doing that you would add to the list, or what would you like to see your university do? Heather asked, I would love to hear more on the moves / process for the career readiness and civics literacy exam. I've been saying this for my leadership for the past 2 years. So it is, it's mainly for, they've already been here through our pre-BSN program, and they are applying to the BSN degree. So it's part of their admissions application process to the BSN degree itself. So that's a piece of the puzzle. I've mentioned a couple of times in my leadership about, maybe when they achieve 45 credit hours, that's when they start pushing them to do civic literacy. A big piece of the puzzle with that is that we have not had the capacity in the past to accommodate such a large group of students that might push towards that at our university, but now there are remote options. So my hope is that maybe we can work together. One of the other things I've broached to my leadership is that maybe we talk about sponsoring students to go do civic literacy, like from a college standpoint, giving them some type of incentive, because I think the testing, the max cost if they do the online version through FAU is $58. And then there's another option that's through Florida State College in Jacksonville that we utilize, that's about $26. So but yeah, feel free to send me an email, Heather, and we can talk more after this. All right, and Jessica, we have a soft hold for registration for the career readiness module that turns into a hard hold if the module is not complete. You're right, Susan. So Susan works with me, and that's a really good point. Yeah, I forgot about the soft hold. Thank you. Maybe a registration hold needs to be placed on a student when they hit a credit like 75 or 90. Yeah, absolutely. We did just update our academic progress to degree policy this last year, where major changes are limited after, or really they're not supposed to happen after a student acquires 75 hours. There's flexibility in that because we have a lot of transfer students who come in with a lot of hours, but that's a really good idea, Susan. Maybe remind me of that later. Anybody else? Okay. So going forward, let's talk a little bit about the advisor roles. So when I was reviewing all these things that we do, because sometimes until you put it on paper, you don't really grasp the amount of work that you're doing or your teams are doing until you look at it. And so one of the things that I was thinking about the advisor roles is that advisors play all of these roles. From enrollment manager, and I know someone asked a little bit about the numbers. So every cohort for every college is different because the percentage of students that you get is related to the largeness of the college. So it depends. And that's a really very, very generic answer. And also it depends on the program, because some programs are smaller, so they have a smaller cohort of students to manage. But that is also on top of the general, advising caseload they have, where depending again on the program, large to small, but the smallness of a program doesn't necessarily mean that it's an easier program to manage, because, like, for example, one of our smaller programs in our college is the clinical laboratory science, but those advisors often have to do multiple pieces of the puzzle to, override students in the classes, make sure transfer credits have come in. And then there are other advisors who maybe their credits fit a little bit easier. So it's, I don't want to say it's simple because it's not simple by any means, but there are pieces of the puzzle. So, but as you can see, enrollment manager, that is a big piece of the puzzle that I've seen, especially for our advisors. They're not just counseling students on what classes to take, but they're being asked to do these administrative pieces to monitor low enrolled classes because that's maybe not related to metrics, but it's related to the university funding and how are we going to pay for these classes if we're not hitting at least 50% or whatever. So those are pieces too. Recruitment liaison, there is often an ask for advisors to attend different events that they can be a part of to, help us, our programs recruit, and our college to recruit and our university to recruit, just because it's kind of an all hands on deck type of event. We also have academic counselor, transfer credit analyst, event planner, program coordinator, and I got a little silly towards the end and I said troubleshooter. And Google, I mean, every one of us, I think, has gotten an email from a student. Hi, I can't enroll in classes. Or hi, what classes should I take? No further information, and then you have to play detective. I should have put detective on here. That would have been a good one. And then for student roles, they are required to, they should be, I mean, they're required if they want credit to procure transcripts. They need to be an appointment attendee. They need to pay attention to communications. Originally, when I wrote this, I said email reader, but that wasn't super professional, so I changed that. They need to be invested in their own graduation, and they need to be reviewing their degree audit. And so these are all roles that we have to play, and they are collaborative. And so I think one of the pieces that we're really struggling with, and this is just my take in the state of Florida, is how do we move the advisors from not just these roles, but into the roles that they're supposed to be focusing on, which is onboarding the students, helping the students to care about the education. And how, on the flip side of it, how do we get the students to care? Because you would think that, them coming into the school year and, they've been admitted and they're excited and they're motivated. But as we all know, there's a lot of things happening in our world that will impact these roles that each of us are playing. And these are just professional roles. I'm not even talking about your personal roles. Like, we all have roles outside of the workplace that we're dealing with. And so those pieces can affect both of these. And so these are things that we're just all kind of managing and mitigating as we can and are able. And I kind of want to hear from you now. Like, feel free to come off camera and let's discuss what is sticking out to you about things that I've shared. What are things that you hope or want to talk about? And I know this is a recorded session, so if you're not comfortable and you'd rather talk to me offline or virtually but not recorded, that's totally okay. I do see a comment in the chat that says, with more ways to communicate, universities are inundating students with chat bots, emails, texts, and so we are trying to find the most effective way to get information across. Absolutely. That's a conversation we're having at our university too. It's, reducing communication so it matters more, but reducing it to the point that they actually see it. So, absolutely. That's why we need administrative managers to take over these tasks so we can better serve our students in their times of need. I agree. I feel like, and this is also a conversation we've had at our university, is we need an administrative person or administrative people to focus on these tasks that are very focused on, enrollment, and then getting students to, build that relationship. Because I mean, as through the research that NACADA has shown us multiple times, is that the relationship with advisors and students is what keeps people coming back to the university. And not just that, but they're, that belongingness, those pieces of the puzzle. And I think that is one thing that is often missing from the conversation, unfortunately, in the state of Florida, is that belonging piece. Amy says, and they're struggling with that as well. Students often opt out of text messages after receiving just one, so that bars us from using it to reach them later when they have alerts or reports of concern. It's a really good point. I like that, Brooke. Just bring that up. My colleague Brooke says, if it is a graduation requirement, such as language or civic literacy, then a student shouldn't be able to submit graduation application until this has been completed or shows it's in progress on the audit. That is a really good point. That is something that I wish we, not just we, but in general, systems would do better with talking to each other. So that, you know, the system, the graduation application system could read the audit to see this person has this out. Nope. And everything. So that's a really good point, Brooke. I'm writing that down for later. Anybody else? I think juggling all the roles we play as advisors from Anna, thank you. Especially without structural support from the university, acknowledging the importance of work and how it's tied to university goals and success. Yeah, absolutely. Is anybody getting support from their institution that you feel like is adequate? You can just give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down reaction if you don't want to comment. Okay. Heather, do you mind sharing what your institution is doing that makes you feel supported?
Yeah, are you able to hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, we just have so the emails like anything we're tracking that is sent to us by our like student service administrator we have. So even though I am tracking all these cohorts, I'll be honest, like we're given like spreadsheets and things saying, "Hey, can you follow up with these students? Hey, Heather, you have, whatever, 10 students that haven't done this, this, or this." So all of these metrics. It, so when someone mentioned we should have an admin person doing that, we do have that within our college. I'm College of Design, Art, and Performance. So I think that's super helpful, and I feel supported in terms of like that. I think my biggest thing is that career readiness module. What annoys me on that is it's being put on. It's just like constantly the advisors have to follow it. It's not our hold, so to say. It's the career services hold. But yet it's always the advisors have to track the students down, and then we always get these emails of do this, do this, do this, where it's kind of like I was like, why is this just not completed in the admissions or orientation? You know,
Mm.
that seems to be that CS that's called CS hold in our institution. I don't know if that's everywhere, but that's the biggest thing. And then the civics literacy exam. Those are the two things that I feel. Everything else, though, I do feel supported in terms. We also have like a student advocacy office where they also are reaching out to students in the background, so to say, to make sure that they're also following all the cohorts that are being tracked. I think my biggest, I mean, I may be getting off a tangent a little bit, but I have a lot of students who've experienced mental health, things in the past year, 2 years, all those things. And then obviously, they're falling off a degree progression. And then we're kind of like, why is this student taking a semester off? Why is this? Why is this? And it's losing that human connection of like, well, because we just had two hurricanes and, they're doing all this stuff. And yeah, everyone's got to take time off. So that's, you know, I don't know. That's my world.
That's a very good point. Absolutely. There's so many pieces of the puzzle that these metrics just don't show. And so like having the time, we have a student advocacy office, which is what the academic advocate office I mentioned was. There's just so many pieces of the puzzle. And I know like for us where we're located, we are very rural. I'm always mess up that word, so forgive me if I sound silly, but that we are very rural and we have a lot of students who have a lot of life going on. And so having those conversations with university administrators or the advocates to be like, you know what, this student has made it abundantly clear that they do not want to go to class. And sometimes I'll be honest, it's very hard because there is a disconnect between understanding that we don't want to push the student further than what, because there is a particular challenge that we could lose them altogether if we push them too hard. Figuring out the balance here for sure.
And then with us in St. Pete, we had two hurricanes, Helene and Milton, back to back. And then it was just like what a lot, I mean, it's just a disconnect of like higher up knows we just all went through that. And then they're like, why is a student not in classes and why is this? And it's like everyone was so heavily impacted by that. And then everyone just, was supposed to go back to life in January when it all both happened in October. So that was a struggle. But yeah, no, thank you.
For sharing. So it's 10:50. I do want to give you guys time back. Does anybody have any other questions or anything that you'd like to share? I know we've had some questions before, so if you guys are okay with it, I will go back through those. Um, so someone asked, how is that enforced? I think that was you, Anne. Well, that's a really good question. Kind of goes into what we were just talking about. So it's enforced through a lot of student contact. And a lot of our advocate office often does a lot of what's a very nice way to say that they incentivize? There we go. They incentivize their students or our students to come to college or go to, if we're at a place where we're trying to get them to graduate by, let's, for example, we have the students who who are in the first time in college cohort. They started with us in 2022. And so their graduation date they need to graduate by is this summer, 2025. Or 2026. Obviously, I don't know what year it is. Sorry, guys. And so one of the ways that we try to work with the academic advocate office is getting those students into classes or trying to find a reasonable path to graduation so they can stay on target. Doesn't always work. And sometimes the things that are holding them back, like the amount of classes, is just too great. Or the student, like I mentioned, is very adamant they do not want to go to school. And so that's a balancing act. And I would even say sometimes that is a negotiation tactic that we have to sometimes utilize with not only the students, but also the advocates and the other offices that we work with, and even the departments, like, is there a way that we can create a course for students? So it's a balance. It gets enforced a lot of times through conversations with our students and also sometimes a good old incentive. And then Lacey, you asked me how many students are each advisor and the school responsible for. So how many students per advisor? And Leslie, I see you responded to about 20 students in the social science cohort. Lacey, were you asking like overall or just cohort students? Overall. Okay, that's what I thought you were asking. So overall, we recently did an academic advising survey, or not survey, review for how many students per advisors are in our college, like just at a higher level. Like I mentioned, it does depend on the program because in our college we're assigned by program, whereas like my friend Brooke is the director for the College of Business, and they are assigned like overall, like they all can be assigned to every student because that's how their model works. And so for our college, per advisor was about 392. So we had 12 advisors in that. And so that was what they said would be like the assignment as our current model says. I know what I had told my leadership and the leadership that I was talking through that with is I really would like it to be less than that, like closer between the 300 to 350 model, because it's still, but even that model is still really difficult. And I think the most recent NACADA data, and I could be wrong about this, so please forgive me if I am, was about 296 to 1 was what the goal was. But again, that is also very different per advisor because some advisors in our college have multiple programs, so they have a bunch of small ones, and so it varies. And then we also still have people in training who are still learning how to, learn those programs and stuff, and so their caseloads are a little bit smaller because they're in that piece. So, does anybody else want to comment on that? About caseloads? How does that work? Advisors disengaged with doing caseloads are unmanageable or constantly reactive. What do you mean by constantly reactive, Brooke? Do you like changing a lot?
I'm actually Beth.
Oh,
No, well, Brooke has commented too, but we shared the same link.
that's
So,
funny. Okay, that's
no,
hilarious.
I guess reactive is when she said that about spreadsheets, and I didn't put what comment I wanted to because it wouldn't be Brooke's language. I wanted to say it's spreadsheet hell because that's what we live in. But
As far as reactive, when, there's not a lot of caseload management time, and that's more of what we're facing on the metrics end. But of course, now in my new role, I can take, that's pretty much a lot of my responsibility. But when it's constantly reactive and it's just you're more in triage mode, it's constant back-to-back appointments and, we're growing in enrollment, but not growing in advising capacity. And the culture is changing too, right? So that's what I mean by that. I think it has to be more manageable in that sense.
Right, I agree. And I really like the model that Heather shared with us about having a student services administrator. That's my job right now. So I feel like,
Mhm.
I feel like that you're right. It's a lot to manage and I'm looking in the chat and some people are, sitting at over 600 students where they're in a program by advisor model or advisor by program model. No time for data analysis and student outreach, correct? We only have around 500 to 600 students total. That's a lot, girlfriend. Um, but I know there are people with more. And then Deborah is like, they wonder why we don't take our PTO. So yeah, these are very good points. All great, great distinct conversation. So we're at 10:56. I'm going to go ahead and move this toward conclusion. So at the end of the day, thank you. If no one ever tells you this, thank you. Thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for the things that you navigate that nobody ever will see. And thank you for what you are doing every single day, especially in the state of Florida. You're one of my peeps in Florida. And thank you also for coming and spending an hour with me today. If you have any questions or want to reach out, I'd love for you to find me on LinkedIn. I tried to be cool and put a QR code, but it did not work for me. So feel free to just search me with my name. And I'd love to connect with each of you, especially if you're in the state of Florida. But this is not a one size fits all, solution, unfortunately. But we are working on this group project together, and you're not alone. Okay. So thank you so much for today, and I'm going to turn it back over to Kylie. Kylie, did you want to say anything before we end?
Thank you all for attending and thank you so much for the work you do. We are very grateful. So enjoy. Have a great day.
Thank you guys.